I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, recorded on December 10th, 2014. Theme Thursday is a Gallup webcast series that dives deep into the CliftonStrengths Finder themes, one theme at a time, and today's theme is learner. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you. It's right below the main video window. We'd love to have you log into that as well. That way we kind of know who you are. We want to thank those who are out there live and have already logged in. If you're listening to the recorded version or you need custom strength solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, super simple. Just send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Also, if you're on the live page, there's a form right to your right there that you can fill out as well, and we will get right back to you if you have those questions. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, gallupstrengthscenter.com, for all your coaching resources and strengths enthusiasts, in this case, training needs. You can also catch the video, both streaming and now downloadable and RSS available feeds. No way you can't get to this podcast now. You have to listen to it. You can listen to it on the phone, on the road, in a car, in a plane. I think that's a Dr. Seuss book in there somewhere. All that stuff is available over at coaching.gallup.com. Kurt Liesfeld is our host today. Kurt works as a senior learning and development consultant here with Gallup on the riverfront. Today he's in Irvine. And Kurt, welcome to another Theme Thursday on Wednesday.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be on the show here, and thanks for moving it to Wednesday because we haven't figured out how to do these from an airplane yet. And I'm really excited to be focusing today on one of my favorite themes, learner. Maybe it's because it's one of my themes, but also because we have Paul Allen, Strengths Evangelist here at Gallup, who is a learner extraordinaire to be our theme poster child. So I'm really excited to have him. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kurt. Good to be here.
I'm going to kind of jump into our theme overture, our theme du jour here, the learner, and so I'll just begin with just a short description as I try to kind of boil down the essence of what this theme is. I really think learners have a natural curiosity and enjoyment of learning experience that leads to ever-evolving paradigms and ever-expanding perspectives. And while learning is a thinking theme, I have really come to believe that there is an emotional part to this theme. It's people who enjoy the process of learning. There is an energy that's created. I have this theory, and I think I've had moments of this as a learner. I call them, you've heard of a runner's high? I think there may be a learner's high. When you're exposed to some new information, or you have some new experience, or you're introduced to some new concept, and there's this energy rush that you get, and so I really see it as really people who get an emotional boost from experiencing and learning new things. I think people who have learner enjoy learning curves. They like how it feels to be in learning mode. And to some degree, we don't like how it feels. We don't like it when we get on what I would call a learning plateau, where we know everything there is to know about something, or it's when learners can kind of get bored sometimes, when there's nothing new left to understand. So they kind of look for, okay, what's the next learning mountain to climb? It's interesting that learning is the second most frequent theme found in people's top 5 in our database of 11 million plus people. I think the number is about 29%. It's right behind achiever at 32%. So there's quite a few learners out there, and it's not surprising. I mean, to some degree, these are people who buy books, and these are people who come to development programs to some degree. So our database may be a little bit skewed because of that. Some words that I would use, nouns and adjectives that might fit, there are probably more. Student, explorer, discoverer, self-helper, continuous improver, expert. Adjectives would be curious, interested, inquisitive, open-minded, studious, passionate, competent. I think the balcony of learner is it's someone who is always learning, catches on quickly, interested in many things, finds life to be intriguing. The basement is that sometimes we might become kind of a know-it-all, or we may lack focus on results, or we learn a lot, produce little, or we may be perceived as kind of bookish. I think learner is often confused with other thinking themes, and Paul is a great example of someone who has lots of thinking themes and his as dominant themes. He has learner, input, ideation, intellection, strategic, and analytical in his top 6. So sometimes those all kind of blend together. So the way that I like to kind of get to the clarity of a theme is by comparing it and contrasting it. So I'm going to try to compare and contrast learner with some of these other thinking themes to kind of see how it stands out from them. Learner input. How I would compare those is that learners really enjoyed the process of learning, the experience of learning, whereas input really is more about the content of learning, the stuff of learning. And obviously, if you've got both of them, you enjoy both of them. But another way that I might say that is people who have learner like the learning experience, people with input like the learning equipment, the things that lead to learning, things like books and tools and information, websites. Comparing learner to intellection, I think learner is more external. It's about the world out there. It's all of the experience, all the new information. It's all the new ideas. It's about exploring new. Whereas I think intellection is more internal. It's really thinking. It's more about focused on deep understanding, deep internal understanding, whereas learner is kind of broad, quick exposure. So it's this kind of inside-out thing. Learner with analytical. I think of a learner as an emotional student. I think as analytical as a logical student. So there's almost this emotional kind of logical difference that you see in learner and analytical. So those are some ways to kind of help distinguish, and I'm hoping that Paul can kind of give us some more insights into how he parses these different themes inside of his own soul. I think it's also important to think about how many times the learners, we talked about a theme gesture. My theme gesture for learners, we've been trying to include these. I think this is a theme gesture for a learner, kind of scratching one's head. It's kind of maybe the universal symbol for I don't quite understand yet, but I'm going to figure it out. I think that's what learners do. They have this kind of natural curiosity that kind of leads them to learn more. Another way that we could kind of compare these themes, another thinking theme that we could compare learner to would be context. Context is really about learners who are more historical. They really study the past. That's actually outside of self too. It's kind of behind us, but it's certainly outside us. So I find that learners are people that like to be on the frontier. Whatever the frontier is, they like to be on the cutting edge because that's where things are new, that's where things are fresh, and I think that's where learners are the most alive, in those moments where there's something new to encounter, new to understand. And as a result, I think learners are people who, I had this in this definition, they're people who love the process of learning, and that leads to ever-evolving paradigms and ever-expanding perspectives. So that's my theme overture here for the day, and now we'll kind of get someone who has this theme. Paul, why don't you just introduce yourselves? I know you're pretty well known probably by our audience, but in case we have some new people, talk a little bit about who you are and the role you play at Gallup.
Okay, so I joined Gallup just 2 years ago, 2 years and a couple months ago. And Kurt, my strengths journey actually started 3 years ago. So it was actually a little less than 3 years ago where I was introduced to CliftonStrengths Finder. And I have to say, you had me at learner. when I read my learner description after taking this 30-minute test with 177 questions, I just thought, how in the world does this assessment know me so well? I read over and over again my descriptions of my learner, my input, and other themes, and was astonished. I was blown away that anyone could figure this out by asking these interesting questions. But so what I do for Gallup now, after 22 years as an entrepreneur, kind of starting several different companies in different fields, I joined Gallup because I love this StrengthsFinder instrument, and I'm the evangelist that gets to travel and speak about it and work on internet strategies, try to create larger and larger exposure to more people, and of course attract more coaches to help people understand and digest and really incorporate their strengths in their everyday life. So I'm having a blast. It's been so much fun to go speak to audiences as large as 1,200 people. A couple weeks ago in Austin, Texas, I got to speak to 150 CEOs for 90 minutes without a PowerPoint. And there are so many strength stories that have come to me over the past 2 years from coaches and from practitioners that I actually could speak for probably hours and hours without notes and without a PowerPoint, just because there's so many exciting things to discuss. But Kurt, I have to say, I'm getting, I think, my deepest insights about my strengths and the strengths of those around me have come from studying your work, and now more recently listening to your videos and the deep understanding that you have about each theme. I'm very grateful to be a colleague of yours and to be able to participate. If it's the poster child for learner, great. I'm glad you share that theme as well, but it sounds like a very large percentage of the population, a decent size of the population, has that learner theme, and so it'll be fun to discuss that today.
So I'm curious, Paul, what do you look like when you were in learning mode? How would we, by observing you, what would we see you doing when you were leveraging your learner strength?
So the very first statement on my StrengthsFinder Insight report says, it's very likely that you treasure books and other publications because they are rich sources of information. My personal library at home is about 3,000 books now. I've spent thousands of hours in libraries. When I moved to Washington, D.C., I got a Library of Congress library card, which is free, by the way, but very few people tend to know that you can actually get a card. So you'll see me at bookstores, you'll see me reading on my Kindle, you'll see me with a book regularly, especially when I travel. But I'm constantly reading and absorbing the written word. And I read something in 2002, 2003 from a book which really shaped my information diet in a big way. It was a book called Love is the Killer App by Tim Sanders. And Tim Sanders worked at Yahoo at the time, and he's now a famous speaker, a motivational speaker, and a consultant. And what Tim says in the book, Love is the Killer App, is he talks about digesting information. He said 80% of your diet of information should be from books, not from newspaper articles or kind of the 24-hour media where, you can only go so deep when you're reading new articles or hearing a 30-minute story, or a very brief story on a 30-minute news program. Books have taken years to write and to edit, and they are more well thought out, they're more well structured, they're far more worthy of your time to invest in them. So that really affected how much time do I spend online surfing or browsing, and how much time do I spend in that very high quality information of something that's gone through an editorial process and is ready for prime time, and can become a classic book that people will refer to for years. So that's probably how you'll see me, is you'll see me with books and taking notes and really trying to master the material as I read it.
I talked earlier about the kind of the emotional aspect of learning. I don't know if that resonates or not with you or not, but I wonder, have you ever had a learner's high that you recall, a time when you had this endorphin rush, not because physically, but because intellectually you encountered something new?
So I would say many, many times. I remember distinctly walking out of the Brigham Young University library after having spent hundreds of hours there looking for old books that could be put onto CD-ROM and then later put onto the internet. And a lot of the books that we digitized were genealogical. But I remember actually a very strong sense of high that I was an explorer finding old materials in libraries that should be circulated massively in the modern age. And I wrote a letter to a friend who had inspired me to kind of get into business years earlier and just said, you know, I feel this high that I'm exploring and discovering old books that have great information and knowledge and wisdom that can be, you know, brought back into into conversation in the modern time. So that was one distinct emotional high. Another thing that I remember, I wrote in my personal journal for over 30 years. I wrote almost every day in a journal, and I remember in one of the dark days of being an entrepreneur, you get depressed, you get discouraged, you find you're facing challenges and obstacles, you don't know how to overcome them. And I remember writing in my journal that all I have to do when I'm feeling discouraged is sit down in my library, pick up any book, and within an hour I've snapped out of it. All the energy and enthusiasm has just come back to me. So when you talked about the emotional side of being a learner, I realized not only have I experienced the learner's high that you talk about, but I've also used learning as a way to get out of a funk. And
it's therapeutic.
It's totally therapeutic. There's nothing like it for me than to learn something new that I'm interested in, and it just gives me that energy and gets me back doing what I do best.
This may be a new strategy for those of us who get depressed and have learner. You need to read more.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, on the Theme Insight cards, it basically says, you know, you need exposure to new information and experiences. I talked to a guy 3 weeks ago. He's not employed right now, and he was kind of discouraged. He's looking in the D.C. area for work, and his last job, he had it for 2 years. He was training people on how to use software, and he said he enjoyed that job for the first 6 months, and then it got really monotonous and routine, and he really didn't like it after that. Well, it turns out he has learner in his top 5. And I'm like, you know, you've got to find a job that allows you exposure to new information and experiences. You can't just learn something once and then teach it over and over again. I'm like, you need, just like you need oxygen, you need exposure to new information regularly. So yes, I think you're right, Kurt. That could be a very important step that people take when they're not feeling positive about life or themselves, is to feed that learner.
You know, you used the word digesting earlier when you were talking about learner, and I think you're one of these people that has a lot of thinking themes. And when I hear you talking, I hear, you know, intellection, and I hear input, and I hear context and analytical. I hear a lot of those things. How do you differentiate between these things, or do you, or are they just kind of a fusion of things?
Well, I've definitely thought a lot about each strength and how it plays out and how it interacts with the others. I almost feel like my top 6 are actually chronological for me in how I approach things. So, for example, if I start a company like the genealogy company, Ancestry.com, I didn't know anything about genealogy when my partner and I started that company, but I spent a ton of time talking to librarians, visiting libraries, going to genealogy conferences. So I started with my learner, and I dove in very, very heavy. And then I started with my input next to become kind of an encyclopedic resource. Like, I had to not just learn a few things, but I had to master all the field of genealogy, like all the content and all the software and all the people and all the companies and all the libraries and archives and where they were and what they contained and what people needed. And then my ideation kicked in. And so brainstorming, once you kind of have this knowledge base, then you get into the brainstorming side of it. And then what I find with my intellection is that I need long drives or long airplane trips, and those are where my best ideas come out. After I've had hours and hours on a long drive or a long flight, I kind of, everything synthesizes. I don't have any pressures. I don't have any demands on my time. I'm just sitting up there 36,000 feet above sea level, and just kind of looking at the world, and that's where my intellection, I think, really kind of kicks in and figures things out. And then, strategy is where you look at every possible avenue for doing something, and you pick the best one. And then analytical is how I measure, did I get it right? I'm a very data-driven person. I love web analytics. I love anything that says, hey, you did better today than you did yesterday. You got more customers than you did. So we're on the right track. So analytical kind of measures, did we get it right? So I kind of view that for each company that I've started, and even joining Gallup was kind of a similar journey. I kind of used those strengths in chronological order to get to the point where now we're measuring the growth of the strengths movement, worldwide, and we know we're on the right track.
Yeah, there's almost a sequence to how you use them. I like that. Would you consider? I mean, are you a social thinker, or are you more of an independent thinker? Are different variations of along the? I mean, yeah, when you talk about do you do this work alone primarily, or do you do part of this sequence with others?
So I prefer a lot of alone time, a lot of thinking time, a lot of reading time, a lot of processing time, but it's always sparked by the ideas of others in books or conferences. I attend a lot of conferences. In the 90s especially, I attended pretty much every internet conference that I heard about, and I wouldn't be super social. I didn't make a lot of friends at those conferences, but I would listen to the speakers, take notes, and really get fed by other thinkers on the topic, and so I consider myself not so much a social learner as a very individual, private learner, but the sociality comes from, the author's thoughts and the intimacy you get from other people's thoughts and ideas by reading their printed word, and sometimes by rereading and even memorizing, what they had to say. So yeah, it's definitely not live social. It's not like a woo type thing where I'm getting energy in the moment by having conversations with people. It's much more a private journey for me.
Do you like to share? Do you like to teach?
I do. I love to teach. I never liked to teach the student thing. I taught entrepreneurship for 2 years at Utah Valley University. I taught internet marketing for 2 years at Brigham Young University. I teach a lot about strengths, but I never like to give the same lecture twice. It bores me to tears. It really does. It is so hard for me to say the same thing that I said yesterday or the day before or the week before. And so I have ideation, and I think part of my issue when I stand up in front of an audience is something strikes me and I have to ideate on the fly. And so I think my ideation creates a lack of discipline around learner and input. I think a lot of people are very comfortable teaching material that they've mastered and getting joy from watching other people kind of go through that learning curve. For me, I get bored. I have to tell new stories. I have to find new things. My textbook in the colleges that I taught at was daily or weekly newsletters that were coming out. I had my students subscribe to the industry newsletters that were the latest internet marketing tactics. And so we studied the breaking, like the stuff that was announced yesterday, and we would test it out in class the next day. And so we weren't relying on 5-year-old or 10-year-old material. It was brand new breaking news every day, and that's what kept me very interested in the field.
I think that's given me a new insight into it. I thought about this. I think learners like variety, but I think they also like fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Fresh may be a word. Fresh information. Information has a short shelf life for you.
Yeah.
It's day old, just like day old bakery. You don't want to buy bread at a day old bakery. I want the freshest bread. You want the freshest, most up to date information. I think that's part of what learners are. That's what keeps them moving toward the frontiers. They're comfortable there.
Yeah, I think that's true, and really in my entrepreneurial career, anytime there was a new technology or a new platform, that's what I wanted to learn about so that I could build a strategy around that. So yeah, you won't find me in traditional business roles. You'll find me kind of on the cutting edge, whether it's Bitcoin this year or cybersecurity, those kinds of things where I'm just drawn to what's the brand new, latest, fresh content that's out there.
You know, I think just the little bit I know, have had exposure to you, I think you have a very broad range of interests. Is that true? I mean, you talked earlier about Russian literature and internet security. I mean, those seem to be on kind of different ends of some spectrum somewhere. I have learner, but I am I have maximizer and focus that I think really, I have more kind of focused interests. And so I think learner might look differently. I don't think everybody's learner is going to look like yours, but it's what I think we'll have in common is that kind of natural curiosity, that kind of wanting to be exposed to something further or farther. Let's see. It looks like do we have any questions out there, Jim?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions we can throw in. So David asks, given that Paul's top 5 are all strategic thinking themes, does he actively seek partnerships with others high in executing and influencing things, or simply find ways to leverage his own supporting, executing, influence, and talents?
That's a very, very good question. So the answer is yes, I definitely actively seek for partners that are great at execution, and I've done that without really knowing the strengths themes. I actually was very lucky to have a partner for 20 years in my entrepreneurial career that was fantastic at execution themes. Looking back now, it's clear the roles that we each took were very complementary. But I also, when I looked at my 7th, 8th, 9th theme, I've got competition, activator, and achiever. And so I also try to utilize those themes when I need to get things done. I would prefer to partner with people and get many more things done than I can do on my own, but occasionally I'll need to activate and achieve and work long hours and do something myself, even though I definitely believe in partnering is a superior way to leverage myself and to get a lot more done with people that are so good at execution and relationship and influence themes.
And Maureen had asked, since you mentioned that, she was asking, where is your activator? And then I kind of want to ask you, how do you think you're most effective using activator with learner?
How am I most effective using activator with learner? So activator is my 8th theme, right after competition. And I don't know. I mean, I think I have impulse. I think I have a finger on the trigger of Amazon one-click purchasing. So if any book strikes my fancy, I think I ordered 3 books this morning before coming to work and downloaded 2 of them on my Kindle, and I'm going to get 1 in 2 days. So I think that I am not shy to spend money in investing in information and going to conferences and traveling. And so I think my activator tends to keep me into those fresh new areas because I'm not like somehow holding back and saying, well, I don't have time for that. I just get drawn into learning new things. And I met a fascinating man in the 90s. I took a trip to, I think, New Hampshire, and met this guy on a lake house, and he did something really interesting. He was the most eclectic learner I had ever met. Since he was a young boy, he would go to a local bookstore, magazine store, and he did this for decades. And he would close his eyes and go to the magazine shelf and pick out any random magazine, and he would go home and read it cover to cover, including all the advertisements. Okay, he did this for years and years. And one of those magazines happened to be Byte magazine, and Byte magazine happened to be talking about Lotus 123 spreadsheet software, and he ended up becoming the first investor in Lotus. And I just thought, he was just this eclectic, like, I'm going to learn a little bit about everything in the world, and it turned into an investment thing that made him very wealthy. So I think I tend to be more eclectic like that and less focused, which is why I've started, many different companies in different fields.
I was going to mention that the theme that is most likely paired with learner is achiever. It's kind of interesting. For the people who have learner in their top 5, they often have, I think it's like 40.4. There's a 0.44 ratio that they will also have achiever. And learner is the only thinking theme that does not have another thinking theme most likely paired with it. And so that's something that seems to be different. I'm not exactly sure what that means yet, but I think that does bring some. So we have this kind of the basement of learner is that, lots of study and no results. Your life doesn't reflect that, obviously, and maybe if learner was paired with execution, I want to learn something, but I also want to get something done. Kind of comes pretty powerfully to that.
Irene asked this question: how much does personal interest? This goes back to the learner's high. How much personal interest plays into the learner's high? Is it more the process of learning, regardless of the subject matter? And she says, I don't have this theme, but most people on my team do. Does that make sense, Kurt?
Yeah. I think it really is going to vary from person to person. I think I have a pretty narrow, I think I have narrower interest than Paul does. He has pretty broad, eclectic interests, kind of across the board. And my wife actually occasionally wonders if I have learner, because I don't, read a wide variety of books. I think there was a time in my life when I kind of read more generally, but now I really, spend more time. My learning is not so much out of books anymore. I study people. I listen to people, and I've really kind of focused my interest is in this whole area of strength. So I've kind of put my eggs in one basket, I guess is what I've done. And so I think that's the way people might be out there. It might vary.
Well, Kurt, your learner, as I said earlier, your learner combined with your maximizer and your focus, you've been using that or in the strengths field now for 14 or 15 years and have mastered the concepts to a degree that I've never seen anyone else, even come close. And so I'm glad that your learner is focused. I think it's a benefit to everybody that knows you or that ever gets exposed to the strengths movement to have you so focused on maximizing your mastery of this material. And of course, as you keep learning from other coaches and other practitioners, it's a real benefit to have you doing what you do. So I'm glad that don't get distracted by all the variety of crazy stuff that's out there. Just keep doing what you're doing.
I'm too much, like I say, I've got my eggs in this basket, and that's where they're going to stay. But I do think that people who are learners have some capacity to evolve, maybe a little more than other people. And this is just something that and so sometimes I've actually coached people who seem to aspire to be something beyond who they presently are. And what I often tell them is, you may need to read different books. You may need to expand or change your reading list, because I think when you are a learner, you, to some degree, allow the new things outside you to come in you and change you. And have you sensed kind of an evolution of who you are that has been shaped by what you have allowed to come into your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in 2008, 2009, with the financial crisis, I actually probably read 40 or 50 books on the crisis, written by several. So I'd never had any involvement in economics or macroeconomics. I was just happily building internet businesses for 20 years, and then all of a sudden there's this global issue, and so I jumped in and studied like crazy. I even thought about going and getting a master's degree in financial engineering so that I could understand the derivatives industry, and I actually spent a lot of time. And it really shaped my worldview in a new way. I mean, it's troubling. It's all the things I learned are not, rose. It's a troubling field of systemic risk in the financial markets, and it hasn't changed since 2008 and 9. And I'm afraid we're probably in for some more financial turmoil in the coming years. So it definitely, by digesting or reading dozens and dozens of books and talking to authors and experts in the field, it completely changed my political views and my views about the world's economy. I don't know if it did any good for me yet, and I certainly don't know what to do with it because it's such an esoteric topic. But you know, Kurt, I found myself every time I would take a new college course, I wanted to major in that subject. You know, I love when I went to Germany last year. I came home and I spent 10 hours on the plane memorizing German words. I wanted to learn German. When I went to Asia for 2 weeks this summer, I spent weeks afterwards listening to Chinese words and building up a Chinese vocabulary. I wish I could learn every language, and I wish I could major in every field. But there's only so much time in the day. I think when you've got the time pressure and business pressure and family life pressure, you know, to spend time doing other things, you can't just, you know, be in an ivory tower learning all the time. And I wouldn't want to be, actually. I like the combination of learning and then doing. And I think those, you know, my 6 through 10 themes really get me off of the, you know, the desk or the computer and out kind of wanting to do stuff with what I've learned.
Yeah.
Paul,
I mean, if I were to talk...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So, Paul, I wanted to ask you, how, with the advent and speed that social media is now providing information, has that changed or had an effect on your learner now that you can consume that information so much faster?
Well, I think it's actually a big problem. I think most of what is shared in social media has very little value. So if you look at the Tim Sanders test, that 80% of your time ought to be spent reading books that were carefully written and edited. I actually think, you know, I still haven't found a news reader since Google Reader shut down that really lets me handpick the stuff that I want to read, some of the breaking news that I want to read. And so I think I spend a lot more time in books and in kind of scholarly articles and a lot less time on social media. I think social media is largely a big distraction from the purposes and goals that each of us have. I think we can, you know, get caught up in an endless stream of inane, you know, material and really waste our life away without even realizing it. You know, I think C.S. Lewis actually has a great quote about the stream, and he says, you know, that people get caught up in the stream as if it were real life. Now, he was talking about the stream of gossip and how effective that was in unfocusing good people from doing good things. If they got caught up in the endless stream of gossip, that was a way to disable them from actually making a difference or doing anything in their good in their life. So I actually think social media is a huge problem for the younger generation and for older people as well, because it is an endless, infinite scrolling distraction away from, I think, learning really important things. Now, if you look at Khan Academy videos and TED Talks and some of the very high-quality content that's out there, Stanford just had a course on entrepreneurship with 20 lectures from all billionaires that have all started and grown a, you know, multi-billion-dollar company. It's very, very powerful stuff. I watched one last night from Paul Graham, and there's only like 6,000 people that have viewed it. So you get 2 billion people viewing Psy video from Korea, and then you get, you know, 6,000 people viewing the most important entrepreneurial lecture of all time at Stanford. So I think we have an issue in terms of how to use better judgment in how we spend our social media time.
Kurt, I interrupted you.
That's okay. Yeah, Paul, I wanted to. Sometimes people are interested in kind of what this theme looks like in its raw state. If I were to ask your mom or dad what you were like when you were a kid with regards to learning, what did that look like at a younger age in you?
So I was actually thinking about that this morning. So as a kid, you know, back in the day, we didn't have a homework after school. You know, even until high school, I didn't have homework. So I'd come home from school and I would play outside until dark. So I loved sports. I was very competitive. But actually, on the weekends and when I was in high school, I would read newspapers and I would read all the time. I used to read encyclopedias and dictionaries for fun. I used to love reading the Reader's Digest Atlas of the world and the Atlas of the United States. I just wanted to memorize all the population tables. I wanted to know what the whole world was like. So I think my mom especially would say that I was always drawn in my spare time to, you know, information, especially reference information. I just really got a big kick out of learning as much as I could and reading as many things as I could. And then in high school, I took as many AP classes as I could, and in college, switched majors several times, and wished I could have, majored in many more things.
Paul, we have something. Gallup has the Strengths Explorer, which is another instrument that measures talent in kind of middle school age kids. And I have a 10-year-old grandson who took it. He has Discoverer, which I think aligns with this learner theme, and he's quite a reader as well. So I kind of hope he grows up like you when he gets through his developmental ages. But I think it's important for us as parents to know what these things look like when they're in their raw form, and that we don't extinguish them, that we kind of pour gasoline on them so they kind of burn even brighter and shine even brighter. Did your parents do anything to either extinguish or to accelerate your learner? Did you feel like that you had that?
Well, they had a lot of books, and I read a lot of their books. My dad, when I was 12 or 13, he saw that I was spending countless hours playing Dungeons and Dragons as a young teenager with all my friends, just all the time, all summer long, 10 or 12 hours a day. And he bought an Apple II computer, and that was a very helpful diversion for me. I was able to learn basic programming when I was 13, and I kind of wrote a 2,800-line program, which was a Dungeons and Dragons simulation program in BASIC. So he didn't quite get me out of the Dungeons and Dragons with the computer purchase, but it did expose me to computers at a young age, and I think that had a really big impact on me within 10 years later as I got into entrepreneurship.
So they gave you some new frontier to explore.
Yeah.
I think that's good advice for parents that might have some of these explorer, discoverer kind of kids.
I think so. I think so. 3D printers, some of the new technologies that are coming out, drones, the little radio helicopter things. I mean, the new frontiers, automated, artificial intelligence, robotics. If you've got kids that are explorers, discoverers, as you're saying, find out what their interests are and give them some of an advantage. Let them live in the future a few years earlier than their peers, because they will then go deeper and learn really important things that will prepare them and maybe help them make a living.
You helped me figure out what I need to get my grandson for Christmas. Thank you.
That's what we do here. One more question for you, Paul, as we kind of bring this thing in for a landing. A couple questions around communication for you, and where does that fall? And then, I'll add to it. Are you drained by communicating, or are you fed by communicating based on your learner?
So that's a really good question. Communication for me is it's in my 16th to the 20th. It's not in my top 15. And in the moment of communication, I'm kind of get caught up in a zone. I get really excited and things. It's always new stuff. It's not like a rote presentation, but it does drain me. It wipes me out. In fact, when I've done seminars or large speeches, I often have to go to the hotel and sleep for an hour or two afterwards just to recover from it. So I'm not one that is energized by the audience after the fact. I'm energized in the moment, and it's always very fun, especially with an interactive conversation or seminar, especially when you're involving other people with their insights. I love that, but it's not something that I can't wait to do tomorrow. And it is very taxing on me.
Kurt, how about you with learner being high there, and you're communicating all the time? When we get done with a week-long training, accelerated training, are you drained or are you charged?
I'm physically drained, but I'm intellectually charged and emotionally charged. But I am physically drained by it, and I think it's these coaching courses are things that I know and understand deeply, so it takes less energy for me to kind of do them as if I was talking about something I didn't know quite as much about. I think there are other programs that I lead that are more draining because they're not as near and dear to me, but the things that are near and dear to me I think come pretty easily.
And you don't have that same issue with repetitiveness. You're repeating a lot of the same stuff, right? For you, that's okay?
Well, it's actually, I really think every program I lead, even though it's the same curriculum, it's a different program because they're different people. People have different questions. They have, and I'm always learning new things. So I don't want it to be the same either. I would get bored if it was just kind of a rote presentation over and over and over. So the dialogue is different in every program that I do because of the differences of people who attend.
Kurt, any final thoughts as we bring this
Yeah,
in?
absolutely. I just want to thank Paul for being on the webcast today, and I'm just really thankful, Paul, that you got interested in StrengthsFinder. That it was one of the things out there that you saw and you went toward it and you embraced it and you encountered it, because I know that having you in our organization has really enabled us to share this more broadly, and so I just am appreciative, and so I'm thankful for your curiosity and the sequence of all those other themes that we'll talk about at a different date that have contributed to the great results that you've brought with your extraordinary thinking.
Thank you so much, Kurt. I really appreciate that. And it has been a huge privilege for me to be a part of a company that is trying to help every human being in the world discover what's best about them and to maximize their satisfaction, fulfillment, productivity in their life by playing to their strengths every day. So thank you for your thought leadership and developing a deeper understanding. I do fear that of the 11 million people that have taken StrengthsFinder, not a very high percentage of them have gone really, really deep as you invite people to do. And I think that's the next frontier for all of us, is to make sure that the next 11 million, the next 100 million people that take it get to really understand what these patterns mean in their daily life and in their career and in their relationships. But there's some good years ahead, some good decades ahead of spreading the strengths philosophy and the StrengthsFinder instrument to as broad of a population around the world as we possibly can.
That's exciting.
Well, we probably have a lot of new listeners who haven't heard, but Paul, I mean, you're a big reason we are actually doing what we're doing right now with these webcasts, and 2 years ago really pushing forward and helping me get them started here, and kind of the wave that started with them, and of course Called to Coach was the first one we got rolling, and Theme Thursday came not too far behind that, and the Great Manager now going behind that, and we have really exploded with the use of these videos to try to get that information to you in the best possible form that we can. And we want to say, if you're listening to this, thanks for listening. But Paul, thanks for those. That was an idea that you activated on that I kind of took over and just said, let's do this thing. So thanks.
And Jim, this is good social media. This is the kind of social media people should schedule into their calendar, because this is good stuff. This is life-changing stuff.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. You know, you're working to my strengths on this with Woo and communication very high for me, and of course Activator, wanting to always. I never get tired of doing this. I was telling these guys I've done 6 or 7 of these in the last 3 days. I just don't get sick of it, and so it's a way of pointing and using your themes in a way, aiming it in a way that really works well. And so we want to, if you're listening, so Paul, thanks, and Kurt, thanks for joining me each week for these as well as we do it. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. Of course, Paul's behind a lot of that stuff as well. GallupStrengthsCenter.com. Send us your questions or comments, and we do have a blog, a coach's blog. You don't have to be a coach to do it on it, but if you're interested in blogging with us, if you're a strengths enthusiast or a coach and you're interested in doing that, we're still taking bloggers. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can also send your questions to that as well, coaching@gallup.com. We have a thriving Facebook group out there as well, both for StrengthsFinder and for the coaches, although, again, you can cross either one of those and make it work. Just head out to our coaches blog. That's got everything on it, coaching.gallup.com, and all the links are out there as well. I mentioned early on we have a bunch of meetups that are going on. Paul's vision is that we would have hundreds of meetups going on in cities all around the world, and we actually have one in Singapore, so we are international with those as well. But dozens of cities here in the United States have meetups going on. If you want to get a idea of maybe a meetup's going on in your city, just go to coaching.gallup.com and look for the meetup tab, and there's a lot of information out there. And we got some very, very good meetups going on around the country. Reminder, no Theme Thursday next in 2 weeks because it's Christmas, and so if you're in the United States or around the world, we want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you as well. Kurt and I will be back with the next theme. Kurt, do you know right off the top of your head what we're doing next? I didn't look it up in advance either. That's a good reason to stay very close to gallup.eventbrite.com. All our events that we do are listed out there, and we'll be back in January with another Theme Thursday. And we'll remind you, if you found this helpful, please share this video, the link to it, or all the resources that are available with those around you, and we'll look forward to doing this again. For Kurt and for Paul, we'll say thanks, and we'll say goodbye, everyone.